Welcome everyone. I'm Tyler Sturts. I'm the applications engineer for the central part of the United States. So I support all of our dealers and distributors and stuff here in the middle part of the country. And then I'm joined by Terry Turner, who's, how long have you been here now, Terry? A week? You're muted still.
Yeah, a week.
Okay. So Terry's brand new. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody, I'm Terry. Yes, even though I am new to QSC, I've been in the industry for 27 years, I think now, something along those lines. Crestron certified, decided to come over to QSC because it's the next step in my quest of my career, I guess.
Cool. Yeah. It's been a good reunion. Terry and I used to work together not too long ago now. So, all right. So, looks like we have 120 people. I think that's a lot. So, I know this is a good topic to talk about. It comes up pretty much every single day of my job. Um, I'm working with networks, and you're talking to um, different IT teams, different network people, whether it's setting up your own network or working with a customer's network. This is a very good topic to cover over and over again because it never gets easier. We're working on pretty complex networks a lot of times with bigger companies or just government, healthcare, that type of thing. So we're going to go over kind of how we're going to plan the network from a clocking domain perspective. Really explain what a clocking domain is, and then go over some Dante Q-LAN and AES67 integrations and how they work together within the network. So. First thing that we need to really discuss is the base of clocking is PTP, so the Precision Time Protocol. So what you're looking at here is we have two different versions of PTP. Version 1 is going to be all of your Dante traffic, and version 2 is going to be Q-LAN and AES67. And so these are important because these two are completely separate from a clocking perspective. So a Dante device does not clock with a Q-LAN device or 67, and vice versa. They are in two different PTP versions, and so we're going to get to this later, but we're going to reference things, which is something called a boundary clock, which can be a Q-LAN or AES67 device and a Dante device, and how we kind of work with that. PTP does require multicast on the network, so it is information sent back and forth between devices to keep them in sync. It utilizes a process election called a master preferred leader, or to determine a master or preferred leader. Basically, you have a leader and follower within the clocking domain. So if you have run into issues where you've seen multiple leaders or multiple leaders within the same domain, usually that reverts back to our first point here is let's go check the multicast on the network because something is not talking right, meaning that the traffic isn't getting everywhere and it doesn't think there's a leader, and we have basically multiple elections. Network is extremely sensitive to jitter on the network, so we want to make sure that all of our settings are correct within the network to really reduce that jitter within there. QoS. This is the number one question I get every day. Is hey, nothing's working or this isn't working. It usually comes down to QoS on the network, and so we'll talk about the profiles within Q-SYS and how those work. And as far as are we setting up for Audinate? Are we setting up for Q-LAN? There is an option to do a custom QoS assignment in there, and we'll talk about kind of how those properties interact within the file. And then like I was mentioning earlier, V1 and V2 are not backwards compatible. So it requires the use of what we talked about earlier, a boundary clock. So a device that can communicate Dante and AES67. So we're going to go through some quick scenarios here and just kind of really overview kind of how this works within a Q-SYS environment, as well as working with third-party devices such as any of your Dante information. So our first kind of example here is we have two Core 110Fs, but we have no other network audio peripherals. So if we look here, we have two complete standalone cores. So these are completely isolated from each other. We're not streaming to each one of them. Each one of them has a fully self-contained audio path within its own DSP, and we're not reaching out to the other core to send information back and forth. So within here, how this works is Q-SYS knows that there is no network audio. So it sees, hey, it goes through the compiling and it looks and sees, okay, there's nothing leaving this core. It's all, whether it's analog or a soft phone or any of those types of information, it's not going out on the network to require a PTP clock. So there is no clock generated. So you might see that in like the event log. When you compile it up, it'll say something to the effect of, no PTP traffic or no network audio traffic, PTP clock is not needing to be generated. So our second one here is we now have two Core 110s, but each one of these now have an IO8 Flex, which is I miss that device so much. It was such a great little device. I actually have one here right in my office right now. But what we're going to talk about now is now we have audio. So we're sending audio from the core to the Flex, and same thing from core 2 to the Flex. So give me 1 second here. Sorry, my Teams is going crazy. So we have a leader or a clock leader election. So we have two cores on the network, both of them with network audio traffic. And so now we need to isolate a core within the network to be the clock leader. So by default, the BMCA determines the clock leader, which is the election process. And with the defaults completely the same, the lowest MAC address is the first one to win the election here. So this is default across the board. We're not adjusting any settings, no priorities, nothing like that yet. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take that same chunk of information and we're going to go through here and we're going to look at the two cores and then we're going to make a decision as far as which one of these we want to be the clock leader in this scenario. Hopefully this is a familiar screen for you guys. If not, I highly suggest you use this information when you're building your networks. By default, if you have a very simple system, this is probably not necessary. But on those more complex systems, multiple audio endpoints, a converged network, on a customer's network, or just, simply on a standalone network, these are important pieces to keep in mind. So you'll see here we have, a whole bunch of information. We have domain at the top, which we will get to here in a little bit. And then if you look over here, the version 2 algorithm here, this is the order in which it goes through to elect the clock master. So the first thing it's going to look at is your PTP priority 1 in this list. So by default, they're set to 255. Priority 1 is, or 254. And priority 2 is set to 100. So by leaving those as default, they're the same. So now it jumps down to class, accuracy, variance, goes through that next section to see exactly if they are all the same. So if they're all the same up to variance, then it jumps to priority 2, which is why leaving it as default, we're jumping through those first 5 because they're all exactly the same because we have 2 exact same devices. And now our last one here is our MAC address, and whichever MAC address is lower wins. So in here, what we're doing is we're taking the priority 1 of the first core or the second core, and we're setting it to 100, which is going to fall in this priority 1 option here. And what that does is it says, okay, this number is higher than this number, you win the election because it's the first step in the process here. So if we go back over here and look, before our core 1 was the clock leader, now we've changed core 2 to be 100, and it wins based off of the priority 1 value being lower than core 1. Our next scenario here is kind of what I mentioned just a little bit ago about the domains. So a Q-LAN or AES67 PTP version 2 domain is basically, if you want to think of it as an audio VLAN. So what this is going to do is it's going to completely isolate two different segments of the network, or same VLAN, but say two different audio segments. And now they will not be able to cross over and clock with each other, and they will keep them isolated from each other. So if you're running into issues where you're getting really high latency on a customer's network, or you're getting drop packets, missed packets all over the place, because that traffic is having to traverse 5 switches to get to where it's going, and you don't need to send audio from one system to the other. That's a really key item here, is if you have two different domains, they are no longer able to send audio back and forth natively. There's methods to get around that if you need to, but it is no longer time sensitive and synced between the two domains. So you do have to do something like a WAN streamer or something like that to get around that. But now we can isolate the clocks from each other. So now you can have two completely separate systems, and you're going to be able to do that up here in the PTP version 2. So version, and this is important, version 2 only. So Dante, you are not able to change the domain here unless you're going to use Dante Domain Manager. That is the only way to change a Dante domain. So you are going to have kind of two separate areas there that you're going to have to be talking about and thinking about. But with version 2, we can change the domain here within the design properties, just like we did our priority. So now you can see our example here. Each one of these are in its own domain, so they each can be the clock leader in this scenario because we are in separate Q-LAN domains. Our next scenario here is we have a Dante device in AES67 mode. So now we're going to get into what we referenced earlier as a boundary clock. So now we have basically the two exact same systems that we talked about earlier, but now we're going to add two Dante devices here at the bottom. So we have the UND6IOBT, and then we have the UND-X4I. So in here, we're looking at the Dante controller now. What this is going to do is you can come over to the AES67 tab of this Dante device, and you can enable AES67 mode. And what this does, this allows that device to talk Dante and AES67, so V1 and V2, at the same exact time, which now allows it to be the boundary clock, which is going to bridge V1 and V2 domains together. Now, that doesn't allow you to change V1 domain because it's a boundary clock, but it does allow you to basically have one device that's in charge of V1 and V2 at the same exact time. So this is what it would look like if we left everything as a default. So the UND6IOBT is the clock leader and the boundary clock in this scenario. So the DX4I is just a Dante device. The Q-SYS information right now has we don't have software Dante enabled on it yet. So that stuff is only 67. So now those two are separate, but that wall plate in the middle does have the ability to be the clock leader to be the boundary clock because it can talk between both domains here. So now what we can do is, let's say we want to change the election process and we want to elect a different device here. So now what we can do is we'll come over to our core and let's change our PTP priority to less than 127. And what this does is it's the same effect as if you're in Dante controller and you check mark the preferred master option. You are essentially setting that device to 127. And now what we can do is we can affect which devices can be elected as the clock leader. So we can kind of steer the information where we want it to go based on our network architecture and layout. Now, within this process, just remember there's one oddity to this. The MXW access point will always be the clock leader in your scenario. It's just how the device is built. So that's one kind of gotcha that you might run into. Other than that, every other device out there, if you set this device to 127 or below 127, you're going to win the election process. So what we've done now is we've made the core the clock leader, but the wall plate's still the boundary clock because it's the only device that can talk both V1 and V2 at this point. And the core is the clock leader because we lowered its priority to 100. So now it's been elected as the master in this, or the leader in this scenario. Now, what if we want to make the core the boundary clock in this scenario? So right now, the wall plate's the only one that can talk both ways. So if we go to our next slide here, we're going to now add software-based Dante to that core so that it's able to talk both V1 and V2, and then essentially making it the boundary clock in this scenario. So right here, if we add this in, we can make the core the boundary clock just by simply running a software Dante on the core. And what that will do now is it's already talking AES67 or Q-LAN. And now we've added V1 in Dante to it. Now we can make it the boundary clock between the two. Now, we cannot run separate clocking informations on the devices that are running software-based Dante quite yet. We're working on trying to make that available in the future. But right now, the only device that we have that does support this is the Core 510i, the CDN64 card. So now what we've done here is we have added software-based Dante to the core. So now it is the boundary clock because it's able to talk both V1 and V2 at this point. But the wall plate here is still the election process has gone through, and it still has a higher priority than the core. So all we need to do now is go back to the core, change this priority down to 100 so that we're below our 127 mark. And then we get that to win the election process, plus be the boundary clock in this scenario. Now, 9 times out of 10, when you have a core in a system with software-based Dante on it, it's a good idea to treat it as the clock leader and the boundary clock in this scenario because it can talk both ways. It's got a lot of information flowing through it. I mean, another good thing in this scenario is it has a physical power cord. More than likely, you really want the PoE device being your clock leader for the system. You know, if it shorts out or goes down, then the election process happens. You lose audio for a minute, those type of things. So having a device that does have hardwired power is a very good idea to treat as the leader of the boundary clock. So, all right. So now let's talk about, kind of real world scenarios here and kind of how all this works in a real world environment. So you can see here we have a couple IO8 flexes, we have a Core 110, we have an amplifier, and we have a Sennheiser microphone. And as you can see from this illustration, the Sennheiser microphone at this point is a clock leader in this scenario. So we're going through this system and we have basically 5 different rooms, all with the same exact equipment in there. We have room B, C, D, and E that are all stationary. And then we have a portable system that is able to move around. And right now, the Sennheiser mic in the portable system is the clock leader. Now, this is not advantageous for 2 reasons. One, it's a portable system. It can get unplugged and replugged back in whenever it moves. Which is going to cause an election process to happen within the other 4 rooms because it's losing its clock leader. It's going to go through the BMCA algorithm and elect a new device as the clock leader. And while that happens, we're going to have sync and unsync, and we're going to lose audio. We're going to lose audio communication between the system for a 5-10 second amount of time while that election process takes fill. So what we want to do is we want to go through and let's change the priority in room B's core so that it runs the election process. And now when that portable system gets unplugged, nothing's going to happen throughout the system. because that core in room B is not going down with it. So now we can unplug and replug that portable system as much as we want. And that whole time, all the rest of the audio in B, C, D, and E is going to stay live and stay working within that system. All right. So now we have a paging system here with, let's see, so it looks like 8 of our PS1600s. We have a couple Core 5200s in redundancy. And then we have, quite a few amplifiers here to play throughout the building for paging. So as you can see right now, our cores here in a redundant pair are the clock leaders. Now, if we add in a couple of these devices here, the UND6IOs, they are in AES67 mode. So putting them in that makes them the boundary clock because they're the only ones that can talk software Dante, or that can talk Dante right now, and AES67. And through the election process, it's now won the election because of the priority level. Now, obviously, this is a very poor idea. We're taking a server grade appliance and we're handing off clocking to a PoE device plugged into the wall. Obviously, not the greatest idea from a planning perspective and understanding kind of network architecture and how it's fitting in. Obviously, we would want the pair of cores to be the clock leader in this scenario. One, because they're a much beefier device, they can handle that a lot easier than a PoE device and a wall can. And two, it's got hardwired power. We're able to keep it consistent versus a cable getting unplugged or whatever, maybe with the 6IO BTs, or they need to reboot for a reason or whatever. That's going to cause an election process. So what we can do here is we can add software-based Dante to our cores, change the priority one down to 100, and now the pair of cores wins the election process. Now, this is an important key when you're talking about redundant systems. When you have a primary and secondary core, your secondary core in this scenario is going to be your clock leader. And the reason for that is if LAN or core A goes down, the election process doesn't start back over again. So core B just takes right over. It's already the clock leader. It starts processing all the audio and there is no drop in audio. Now, obviously, if core B goes down and it has to go back to core A, then there is an election process because it does need to transfer the leader abilities back to core A. But 9 times out of 10, if you're going to have core A and core B go down, then we might have other issues within the system.
Hey, Tyler.
Yeah.
We got a question here. Is there a way to determine the PTP-V2 primary leader in Q-SYS, or is the PTP track hound the preferred method?
So yes, in the status block of the core, you will see the clock leader field. So this is a really easy way to tell what is the clock leader within Designer. Now, TrackHound, I would recommend every day. TrackHound is a great piece of software to use for tracking down audio from a V2, V2, V1, V2 basis. You can also visually see all the different domains that are out there within there. And then you can also see all of the requests, so the join request, the leave request, all that type of stuff in TrackHound as well. So if you do not have that and you are working with network audio issues and stuff like that, I think pretty much everyone that I've talked to about this, helped troubleshoot or just worked with, TrackHound's like the first thing I have them download because it's so easy to be able to see where information's getting dropped, where my boundary clocks are. Do I have transparent boundary clocks, which we'll talk about, I don't think are in these slides, but we can talk about kind of what a transparent boundary clock is, and information like that. And you can it's a nice visual graph that you can read. So I'd highly recommend using that. But if you do not have that installed, the status block within Q-SYS will also let you know what the clock leader is in that scenario. All right, so just a few more slides here. Like I said, this one's not as integrated as some of the other webinars, so we'll have plenty of time at the end here for questions. So we have now a campus building here. So we have a whole bunch of different classrooms. We have an auditorium, and we have a remote input for the events in the auditorium. So we have the Axon Aterotech piece here that is the clock leader and the boundary clock. Now, this is a remote input, so it can get unplugged, it could get moved, it could get plugged into this port or that side of the stage, or back in the back of the auditorium, or wherever it may be. So having this device be the clock leader and the boundary clock, not the greatest idea here as well. So what we can do is let's go ahead and let's separate all of these devices out, so that way they don't need to clock with each other. So we can have a whole bunch of different domains here. So each room now contains within its own domain. And if we need to send information from the building PA to the rest of the rooms, we can simply use a WAN streamer, which is just a wide area network streamer that allows us to send non-clocked packets across the network to different domains. So we can just hit them through their IP addresses, whether it be the classrooms or the auditorium. We can send all that information to those devices. And now what we can do is we can, in the auditorium, it is the only one that has Dante, because the Axion device is the only Dante device listed here. Everything else is simply Q-LAN between the core and their amplifier. So we can treat and move its boundary clock to the auditorium, so that way it doesn't have to go all the way back to classroom 1 to get its clocking information and come all the way back over to be able to traverse back between the two. And then the other thing we can do here is every one of these devices is now the clock leader. So we can now keep all of this stuff separated from each other without having to worry about, the auditorium clocking to classroom and the classroom going down and classroom 3 coming back up, and now it's the leader. So we have a whole bunch of traffic moving around. The big part with planning kind of how these networks work and how the systems want to look, you really want to be aware of where your clock leader is and the amount of traffic that we're sending over the network. Obviously we don't want to send unnecessary traffic over the network. We already have a ton of traffic. We don't need to add any more to it. So having everything kind of within itself is going to help a whole bunch. And then being able to use priorities to tell the core in the auditorium to be the clock leader versus the remote input in that domain as well.
We got another question, Tyler.
Let's see here. Is there any reason we seem to want to keep the PTP priority 1 elevated as opposed to just setting it to 1 for the devices we know we want to be a leader? In a scenario where we have both Dante and Q-LAN connected to the same network, what should we set the QoS preset to, or does it matter? Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think that's really one that probably gets misconstrued most of the time. Is, hey, I have Q-LAN and Dante on my network. Which preset do I choose? Every single time it's Dante. And really what that is Dante has a preset QoS out of the box. So if I buy that Axon Aterotech piece right there, its QoS preset by default is 56, 46, 26. Those are the 3 values. So 56 is your clocking packet, which actually, let me go back here and see if I can find that slide really quick. Here we go. I wonder if I have one that says, give me 1 second here. Of course I don't. Okay, that's all right. We'll just go over this page here and then I'll kind of explain. So right now, Dante QoS preset on a Dante device. 56 is the clocking DSCP value. Sorry, let me see. There we go. I wanted one without the box in front of it. So your clocking packet is going to be 56 right here underneath Q-LAN. Your second one down is 46. And your third one down, which is your video packets, are 26. So that is kind of the layout of Audinate. Now, when I have the QoS preset in Q-SYS set to Q-LAN, you'll notice that 46 is now the clocking packet. Now, if my switch is set up for Audinate, 56 is now the top priority. So 46 is now second priority. So if there's any 56 packets out there, they're going to get priority. And now if I leave it set as Q-LAN, now that my clocking packet, which is the most important piece of on my network from network audio perspective, is going to start to get dropped because it's now the second in queue. So anything above that is going to get priority over it. So that's why we want to set it to Q-LAN or to Audinate whenever we have Audinate devices in our system. And what that does is it just marks the packet coming out of Q-SYS the same as Audinate uses for its devices. So now everything on the network is 56, 46, 26 across the board down. And then there was another part of that question here. Let me, and then the PTP leader. So as far as how the PTP priority one goes is, yes, if you want to make sure that the device is the clock leader, one is just fine setting it to be the priority one number as one. That is just fine. Just make sure, if you have multiple devices, obviously set as one. Now there's an election process because priority one matches. So now we're going to jump back to class accuracy and variance, and then priority two and MAC address in that order. So just make sure you don't double up on those priorities. So if you want to, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 across 10 cores, that's perfectly fine because it's going to go through and figure out, okay, priority one is this core. This is the one I want the clock leader to be, and it's going to set that up for you.
Yeah, there's 2 more in there. 3 more.
Yeah, you're good. Okay. Best practice, keep AES67 and Dante on separate VLANs. Not necessarily. So, I mean, if your network switch is managed properly and set up correctly, there's no reason to have to separate AES67 and Dante on VLANs. They can interrupt just fine as long as the QoS is set up properly on the devices, and then they're all managed exactly the same. So, having the two of them together, just make sure that your QoS preset and Q-SYS is set up for Audinate, and you won't have. I mean, I've done systems with multicast audio, 400 IP endpoints with 400 Dante devices and stuff, and all of it's on the same VLAN. So you don't have to separate them at all. You just want to make sure that the network switch architecture and and that's really where this kind of webinar comes in, is planning how that information works. Because if I have an 8-story building, let's say, and I have a switch on the first floor and that's where my clock leader lives, every device in that building is going to have to traverse all the way down to that switch, go over and hit the clock leader and come back every single time it wants to get its information. Now those are very small packets and they don't take very much at all, but times 300, you should watch Wireshark on the PTP traffic and see how much traffic that actually is. It's a lot. It's a lot of information coming at once. So keeping that information kind of centralized within the building and being able to do that is going to be very effective and help a whole bunch, which is maybe why the Dante and Q-LAN on the same VLAN, maybe there were issues or someone told you that way. I could see that if it's not planned out correctly from a network architecture. That one's good. Is this QoS for Q-LAN? A lot of Dante and AES67 on the same network. Let's see. If you have a converged PTP V1 and V2, such as, and both having, and we'll have both on 0, have any interference, there's a rectangle AES67. Okay, so Zach was asking about V1 and V2 with 67 and Dante. So if they're both on domain 0, which Dante is automatically on domain 0, there's nothing you can do about it unless you pay Audinate for Dante Domain Manager. So having them together on the same network is just fine, or on the same domain is just fine. They will not interfere with each other because they cannot talk with each other. The only device that can do that is our boundary clock. It's the only device that can talk back and forth and keep those two in sync with each other. Is this QoS or Q-LAN the same? What if we're trying to use both Dante and on the same network? There's a lot of that. I have two similar systems, the Core 110, 3 CXQs, and Software Dante for ULXD and AVIO. Systems are separate, but we have a Q-LAN stream between them for simple overflow, simple flat network. Should I set one core as priority 100 and leave the other? So, okay, so you're talking about you have two systems that are the same, but you want to send audio from one to the other, which you would do through a Q-LAN transmitter or receiver. So yes, from a priority level, I would set one higher than the other one and just understand which one makes more sense. If they're on the same switch and everything's the same, then it really doesn't matter. You just pick one. But in all honesty, in that scenario, you don't need to change the priority because we don't really care too much about which one's the clock leader if it's in a single switch architecture. Now, if I have 10 switches stacked together and those systems are on complete opposite ends of there, then we just have to make a decision of which one makes more sense from a network layout to make the clock leader in that scenario. But 9 times out of 10, if you just have two cores on a convergent network, you can kind of just leave it alone unless one starts to have an issue. Maybe there's a smaller uplink to one switch, or you have a lot more devices on this switch than that switch. Those type of things can play into kind of how you choose which core would become the clock leader. PTP force on, what scenario would require this on? That's a very good question. I've always been told don't touch it unless you talk to support. It can cause what I know for a fact what it will do is PTP force on. I don't know the scenario in which it would technically be required. Other than there's one situation I have run into where I've used this before is PTP force on if the core does not need to create a clock, it will not create one if that is set to off. Now, I can force the core to turn on its clocking mechanism without network audio, and I can clock to it if I need to. Now, obviously, it doesn't have any network audio coming back and forth, but it can act as the clock leader in this scenario for V2 only. Now, obviously, if I don't have Software Dante, the minute I add Software Dante, turning that on will double your audio your clocking packets and really cause havoc on the network. So please do not turn that on if it's generating clock already. The only time you would ever use this is if there is no network audio within your system. So very similar to our first slides here. So let me get back up here. So in this scenario right here where we have no network audio peripherals, it's not generating a clock. So therefore, if we did need the core to start clocking information for other devices on the network, we would come in here and turn this PTP force on and allow it to be the clock leader in that scenario. Cool. Very, very good questions. Is there a situation where you would not want a core to be a primary border? I've encouraged to not use the core with Software Dante as a PTP, and I was curious about the reasoning. So most likely the situation that you're running into is if you have a hardware-based Dante device that can talk both AES67 that is hardwired, that would be probably the only time I would lean towards having it be the clock leader versus the core. And most likely, or the biggest reason for that is because you can separate the Dante and the 67 clocks from each other and keep them in separate domains and do a whole bunch of pretty complex things. But those are on bigger networks. I would say in 90% scenarios of your systems today, whether it be just a self-contained little small room network or a little bit bigger, after that, it will all kind of it'll all work a lot better if you leave the core as the clock leader because it can talk to both. And it's just a better device to do that. Obviously, I don't know how much I can actually. The Core 110 is an older device. And so I would probably lean away from that one more than I would like a Core 8 Flex or a Core Nano because it's got more horsepower and it's able to handle that a little bit better. there are new things coming from us in the near future. So keep an eye out for that, because there's some of these technologies that are going to get updated rather quickly here to be able to accommodate some of the things that you might want to do or just have some more horsepower to do. How long before this is all automated and or pre-configured? That's a very good question. I cannot answer that. All I'll say is we are, an AV leader in AI technology, and a lot of these things more than likely will start to get built in and become a lot smarter as far as being able to manage and look at the network. Now, a lot of these things do take resources from a core perspective. And so some of the features you see on the core obviously use up parts of that core to do those type of things. So, but I mean, 5 years ago, none of this stuff was possible. So, who knows what it's going to happen in the next year or two from an AI perspective. But I would say you would start to see some features like this coming in the next, year to two. But that's all speculation. I don't have any concrete answers other than we like to innovate AV, so we always have cool things coming. We've never been closer. Let's see here. Does any of this change in a system when Genlock requiring P2P to Genlock bridge might be required? That is a great question. I do not know that. I will get back to you. Well, you're anonymous, so I can't. I will let me put my contact information up here on the screen in a minute, and go ahead and send me an email about that, and I will make sure to get you an answer on that. Genlock. Is there advantage of using external clock source for large systems such as Mindbreak? Yes, absolutely. Because that device is built as a clock master, Byron, if you want to put in there, if you were the one that put the PTP Genlock question in there, put that in the chat or Q&A, and then I will reply to you. The Mindberg device is a very good piece of equipment to be able to do that, because it's basically, its sole purpose is to be the Dante clock or the 67 clock in that scenario. It's going to have a much better, it's going to be much more efficient at doing a lot of those things than a core that's also a control processor and a DSP and, all the things that a core can do. So having a third party Dante master clock is a very good idea in a large system. I would say when you get over the 200 count, 300 count, I would say a dedicated Dante clock is a very, very good idea. Recommend for third party Dante clock master. I don't have one off the top of my head, but I'm gonna write your down so you. Second, let me get a better piece of paper.
I think he's asking when would we
Oh,
recommend it?
when do you? I thought you said
Yeah.
what do
And
you?
you,
Okay,
yeah,
there
you
you go.
just
And
said
I
it in the
just answered it. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
would say, your larger Dante flow counts. So, really, when you have, sorry, hold on, let me write Byron's name down before I forget. When you have a large amount of Dante, and it's really, it's a preference thing, it's budget thing. There's a lot of things that go into that, depending on what you want to clock to, those type of things, if you want to use an external clock, if you want to clock off whatever it may be, having that kind of, threshold that you feel comfortable with. I mean, it's a lot of traffic for that core to handle. So I like the 150, 200 mark, somewhere in there is kind of the breaking point for me of, hey, I have way too many devices for this core to do this and all this other stuff. Let's break that out. So Everts. Nice. Yeah, Aaron, and we did I'm trying to think when and this is just a shameless plug for Activate. We're gonna have an Activate coming up in about a month. I would highly recommend um, I would highly recommend that you tune in for that. Obviously, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but the dealer memos went out about the Core 510 going end of life here rather soon in a couple months here. But there's going to be new information coming out in Activate, and we do go through kind of what devices that we recommend from a boundary clock. I don't have that in front of me. We kind of went through it yesterday as an internal meeting, but that will get announced within the Activate section, so they can. I would just stay tuned for that because that there's going to be a lot of really good information. In a month and 6 days. So it will be May 14th. You should see something get posted pretty soon. Definitely keep that in mind and keep that on your calendar. As you get into the 2300, are you seeing better support from Cisco on boundary transparent mode? Moving clock to the edge. QIO is adding a ton of overhead on the network. Yes. And I kind of hinted at this earlier. So, boundary transparent mode. So, this is a super great feature that's, I know for sure Cisco, I haven't used that on other switch brands, but I'm sure, other switch brands do support the boundary transparent mode. And essentially, what this is the switch goes back to the clock leader and it gets all of its information and it stores it at the switch level. So now the device goes to the switch. Switch is like, oh, I know what you're looking for. Here it is. And it goes right back. And I think kind of what he's referencing there with the QIOs is, they're asking for clocking information a whole bunch. So rather than, and maybe not just the QIOs, like Dante devices in general, don't have to traverse all the way back through the network to find the clock leader. Because that information stored on the switch, it's not the boundary clock, but it is the clock. It is a transparent, meaning that it can get the information and pass it on as if it is the clock leader, and it's able to really relay that information a lot better. And you can tell, I mean, right away how efficient that would be because now you've limited all that traffic leaving that switch and going through the network back to where your clock leader is. Now, obviously, if clock leader is on that switch, it's not that big of a benefit. But on your bigger networks, I did one here in Omaha with like 8 to 10 switches where we turned that on, and I mean, you should have seen the traffic that got cut off by doing that. I mean, it's night and day difference from doing that. And this has been, I don't know, 2, 3 years now that I've worked with that. Um, but back then it was great. It was a huge help from a network perspective of really prioritizing, and that was a time where I had multiple clock leaders. There was a lot of different things we were dealing with, and turning that on helped quite a bit. And then obviously we had some multicast issues to work out, but once we got all that working, it's worked very well for the last 5 years now. Cool. I don't. So let me just recap here. I think we kind of covered over everything, but obviously, if anyone has any more questions, please put them into the Q&A here. But so kind of high level, we have B1 and B2. B1's your Dante traffic, B2's your Q-LAN and AES67 traffic. Um, Planning out how these systems lay out on the network is super important. So kind of like I was mentioning, make sure that your clock leader is in a logical place in the network. Don't put it at the end of a 14 switch run. Put it in the middle so all the devices can kind of meet there and have the least amount of switch hops to get to where it needs to go. Same thing also with your switches. So I mean, if you do have the ability to turn on transparent boundary or transparent clock mode, it's a great feature if it's built in. I don't know if and it doesn't really matter, but I think Cisco, they used to charge for it. I don't know if it's still licensed or if it's just something you can turn on now. But yeah, super great feature. Breaking up your network traffic. So if you have latency issues, you're having clocking issues, those type of things, being able to break up your PTP domains is super helpful as well. Just remember, obviously we cannot send audio from one domain to the other natively. We can do that through Q-SYS with like a WAN streamer, but you cannot do that as well. And then, checking your priority levels. So making sure that, hey, I want this device to be the clock leader. I'm just going to set it to 1. I don't have to think about it then. I know that that device will always be the clock leader, minus a few exceptions with Dante. And then adding software-based Dante to your core allows it to be the boundary clock. So it can talk to both V1 and V2. And then the last thing that's not on here that I think really should be is QoS. And so we kind of already talked about using QoS and making sure your profile set up. If you have Dante at all, automate your profile that you want to have. And then just double and triple check that that is what's set up in the switch. There's been a few times where I've used some of the presets in Netgear, and I thought everything was great. I'd go on the backside, and some of those QoSs are still not set up properly. So I would just, if I were you, you're using the Netgear AV line, jump over to the main side, just double check everything. Make sure, there's a nice, easy QoS section to read through, making sure, you're trusting the IP DSCP values, because those are the ones that we're setting. That's what the 564626 is those are the DSCP values that we're setting within each packet. Making sure those are in the right order. So, in Netgear, it'd be Q7, Q6, and Q5. And then you would be trusting those values to make sure those are applied properly. What is the downside of using a WAN streamer? So the downside of using a WAN streamer is it's not time synced. So there is no clocking associated with it. So it is just a UDP audio packet. It's still multicast, but it's a UDP multicast packet that's just sent over the network, and then hopefully it gets there. There is no time checking. There's nothing on a WAN streamer. WAN streamers are very useful for sending stuff, from VLAN to VLAN, QLAN, or domain to domain. Technically you could send information out over the network or over the internet, depending on how you kind of format it. So there are ways to get around it, but there's a lot of latency in that. There's a lot of things that go along with using the WAN streamer. So I wouldn't use it for synced audio with video, or even really like a ceiling mic. That would not be a good idea. Cool. Well, I'll stick around here for a little bit if anyone has questions. If not, thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope you learned a whole bunch. This is super important topic within network audio and Q-SYS for sure. So really appreciate it. And like I said, keep your eyes out for, we have an Activate coming up. So keep your eyes out for that and learn about some new stuff. So. Can you demo the PTP track out? I cannot right now. There is some software limitation on my computer that I haven't worked out that I cannot run PTP track down for right now. But the yes, my email too. Let me think how. I'm just gonna type it into a notepad for you guys really quick. And you get like a nice slide that has that on there. But the track count is it's by Mindberg, so it's Mindberg track count, and the process is a little confusing when you get to installing it, but using it is super easy. Like you'll open it and you're like, oh, okay, I can, like, it's just a map, and then you see domain 1, domain 2, clock leader here, boundary clock here. Like it's a nice graphical layout that is super easy to use. So but I'll put my email up here for you guys, and then if anyone has questions, I can surely help out as I can for using that track down there. So can everyone read that? It's really, there we go. Let's see here. Earlier, I remember you mentioned that QoS is the #1 problem with clocking issues. Can you elaborate on that a little? Is it just people who haven't bothered to set up switches? And if that's the number, what are a few other common things you see happening? Yeah, so most of the time it's your profile in Q-SYS does not match your switch settings. That's usually the issue that I see most of the time. So, using QoS, and it really depends on what switch you're using too. Like, Luxol does not support QoS. There's a couple other brands that just don't support QoS, and so having that not active on there, the packets are just kind of, they're out there, and whatever one gets there first wins. There is no priority. So it doesn't go into a queue and get routed or any of that information. Like it's just kind of hope this works. And so when you have stuff like that, that has, the time sensitivity that network audio has, most of the time, I'm sure you've seen it in there, but you can set the latency time at 2 milliseconds is about as long as you want it to take before it starts dropping information, dropping packets, late packets, those type of errors that you can start to see on your network. And you'll see that print out in your event log on the core, quite a bit. You'll see, PTP, clocking, forget the actual terminology, but I mean, you'll see packet too late, packet missing, packet dropped. A lot of those things within there. You can use Dante controller on any of your receivers, and you can see the latency count, and you have a nice kind of bar graph there that will jump up and down depending on how long it's taking. And then the other thing that I think is a big misconception, and mostly it just has to do with IT and kind of how we integrate with IT. But a lot of times, I can't tell you how many times I've heard of, hey, the latency is not that high on my network. I don't need QoS to work, and or I don't have a whole bunch of traffic. I don't need QoS on this network. And in normal network environments, that's probably true. But with network audio, because of the time sensitivity of the network packet, it is absolutely necessary to have QoS running on the network. You will have drop packets and late packets all over the place, and you're just going to keep running into issues over and over again. The I don't know of any pre-recorded videos for if you're referring to track count. I don't know of any pre-recorded video. There are. I mean, I'm sure if you just Google it on YouTube, I think that's how I downloaded it the first time. Is just watch someone kind of go through the download process and understanding kind of how that works. So I would suggest doing it that way. Cool. Well, it's 11 o'clock, so anyone else has any questions, my email's up there. So go ahead, shoot me an email here, and let me know if you guys have any questions. But really appreciate everyone joining here today. And hopefully you guys have a great rest of your Tuesday.